Welcome to the first of Renew's 6 Green Rebuild webinars. Tonight's webinar is Rebuild, First Steps. Okay, I will read the acknowledgement of country once I get to the second slide. I also want to acknowledge that it's possible that something might be said through any of these webinars that may be emotionally challenging for you, should you have experienced loss in the last year and a half. We encourage you to reach out for support if this occurs. One resource I know is Beyond Blue. They are available 24/7 and their number is 1-300-22-46-46. That number again is 1-300-22-46-46. Now, I'll go to the acknowledgement of country. We acknowledge the traditional owners of country throughout Australia and recognize their continuing connection to land, waters, and culture. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Sovereignty was never ceded. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. We encourage you to share the Aboriginal land on which you are joining us tonight in the chat. So let us know where you are coming from. Now, some housekeeping. This webinar is being recorded and there are a couple of webinar functions we encourage you to use tonight. They're down at the bottom of your screen. On my screen, they're in the More section. One is the chat function, which could be at the bottom left-hand side of your screen. It may also be in the More part of it. Simply click on the icon to use the chat, and it would be great if you tested it now by sharing with others where you're coming from. Next, the Q&A function is at the bottom right-hand side of your screen. Similarly, click on the icon to open the window, type in your question and press enter. You can also upvote questions by pressing the thumbs up icons. Finally, the raise hand is in the middle of that bottom bar and indicates that you have a question or would like assistance from the host. So that said, we really encourage you to use the Q&A functions to ask questions for later on. Now we'll get to when we will be doing that in just a minute. We have 3 speakers tonight. They will each speak for 7 to 10 minutes, after which we'll have a longer question and answer session responding to the questions you have posed in the Q&A function on your screen. I'll now introduce myself and then our 3 panelists for the evening. I live in far eastern Victoria in Malakuta, a remote coastal community profoundly impacted by the 2019-20 bushfires. I've volunteered for years in efforts to grow community and regional resilience. I'm coordinator of the Malakuta Sustainable Energy Group, a member of Friends of Malakuta, and I present 2 weekly programs on 3MGB Wilderness Radio, our little community radio station, completely run by volunteers, of course. The first program is From Little Things, where I celebrate the little things that happen in our community and in the outside world. And the second is Healthy Conversations, where I chat with the local doctor. I also run Carbathon Consulting, which is a small practice where my focus is nurturing resilience, helping individuals, organizations, and communities create sustaining futures. I particularly like helping others develop their skills for living responsibly and responsively. Remarkably, since my husband and I moved to Malakuta 11 years ago from North Warrandyte, our daughter, her husband, and 2 youngsters, and our son have also moved there. We were all here on New Year's Eve 2019. We chose to defend our daughter's property and to prepare the other 2 as best we could and leave them to whatever occurred. The fires came very, very close to both of our homes, but in no small part due to neighbors and emergency services, Our properties were not lost, and the defense of our daughter's home was also successful. 123 other families were not so fortunate in our town. We have established a community-led recovery association, and COVID willing, our plans for recovery are continuing to emerge. And that's enough about me, but it does put this series of webinars very much in mind of all of those across the country who are in a similar situation to so many of our townspeople. Our first speaker tonight is Paul Bowers. Paul joined Renew in March 2020 after a 20-year career in museums. After a first degree in chemistry and a master's in communication, Paul led major exhibitions and museum projects worldwide, including the Natural History Museum London's Darwin Centre and Museums Victoria's Children's Gallery. He is passionate about communicating science and technology to enable communities to thrive. Our second speaker is Jiri Lev. Jiri is a Czech-Australian architect working in the field of residential, public, and disaster relief architecture and associated research. He is also a heritage advisor and acts as expert witness in legal proceedings. Jiri advocates for sustainable, resilient, and ethical architecture in his writing, lectures, and workshops. He is the founder of ArchiCamp, a grassroots architecture festival focused on learning, networking, and invited architectural intervention within disadvantaged or disaster-stricken rural communities, and the founder of Architects Assist, an initiative of over 600 architecture firms assisting those affected by the recent fires and other disasters. And our final speaker for the evening will be Jenny Edwards. Jenny is the sole owner and director of Lighthouse Architecture and Science, a multi-award-winning practice that integrates science into the design process to deliver highly efficient, climate-resilient homes in the Canberra region. She is not an architect. Jenny has a master's degree in science and is an ACT licensed building energy efficiency assessor. She has been doing theoretical energy efficiency testing of designs using thermal performance simulation software and physical building envelope testing of built projects since 2009. Wow. Can't wait to hear all three of these speakers. So just a reminder that all presentations will be run first, and then we will have a Q&A discussion with the panel members. Over to you, Paul.
Good evening, everybody. I'm coming to you from Wurundjeri land in the Kulin Nation, just very close to North Warrandyte, in fact, Tricia. It's a privilege to be here this evening. It's a privilege to be the CEO of Renew, who have created the Green Rebuild Toolkit with support from the international philanthropy organisation Global Giving. Renew is a national organisation of some 11,000 members across Australia. We have been active for 40 years in creating advice and events and publications for households across Australia. We are keen on promoting household sustainability and removing barriers to household sustainability at the government and regulatory level. We're publishers of Renew and Sanctuary magazines, and we run nationwide events, including Sustainable House Day. We also have a network of active volunteer branches across all Australia, running local events for communities interested in sustainability. So the purpose really of the Green Rebuild Toolkit was to try and translate some of that support for sustainable living into the rebuild efforts for those affected by the disastrous bushfires a year and a half ago. We're aiming to help people in whatever way we can to rebuild in a way that is resilient to future events and the future warming climate. And we've done that by a range of reasons, but a range of ways, but starting off with the construction of the Green Rebuild Toolkit website. So at greenrebuildtoolkit.com, we have built a set of resources that includes topics such as finding your team and planning your rebuild, designing for climate and bushfire risk, looking at materials and construction, power and water, around the home, retrofitting resilience, and also a platform for sharing stories and bushfire experiences. The beginning of this launches with this event, and over the course of the next 2 weeks, we are running a series of webinars with a series of speakers with great expertise. They're all free, so do please come along to those that might be helpful and useful for you. We are also coming up, we will be running some of our event formats in a way that we hope will be supportive of communities as well. So we run an event series called Speed Date a Sustainability Expert. These are intended as a way for people to get bespoke advice on their very specific needs as they need them. We bring together a series of experts, architects, builders, engineers, and so on, and arrange a set of conversations where people can bring their rebuild plans, discuss their challenges, and get expert advice on the spot. The idea here is to make people more aware and support their activities in their rebuilding. We will be running a series of speed date events as part of our Green Rebuild Toolkit. So look out on the website for how to get involved with those. We also, as part of our expert advisory team in Melbourne, we run consults, we call them, a session for a couple of hours with an energy and household sustainability expert to look in real depth at your plans or drawings and specifications and equipment lists and so on, and to go through in some detail the specific ways in which we could make choices that are going to improve the future energy efficiency and sustainability of homes. And we will also be offering consults as part of the Green Rebuild Toolkit work that we're doing. So again, look out on the website for how to get involved with those. But what's much more important tonight is that I hand on to the experts that we have here to move on to talking about how to get started with your green rebuild. So I am going to pass over now to our next presenter, Jiri Lev. Over to you, Jiri.
Hi everyone. And yeah, thank you, Paul, Tricia, and all the others for organizing this worthy get together. Let me share my screen with you. There we go. Right, so let's hope you see. Oh, sorry. All right, so I'll just start by quickly introducing myself. So my name is Jiri Lev. I'm an architect registered and practicing in Tasmania and New South Wales, mostly. I was born in Brno, which is in Czech Republic, in a winemaking region. And after having lived in Prague for a while, I moved to Australia, to Sydney. And besides architecture, I organize various events like this architecture festival, kind of learning experiences for students and other architects, building, as someone mentioned at the beginning, Tricia did, building or designing various assets for communities that might otherwise not get built. community museums, tourist hubs, things like that. Typically pro bono projects, halls. This is a little high school in Cambodia, like a charity-driven project. And yes, that brings me to the Architects Assist, which is an initiative of several hundred architecture firms in a bid to assist those affected by the recent fires. So, as we all know, the fires in Australia are a fairly regular occurrence. They're quite devastating. They happen every so many years. These last ones have costed us about 5,000 buildings, 2,000 homes damaged. An interesting statistic that sort of struck me was that only 77 or 3/4 of homes are insured in Australia for these kind of events. So there's a staggering 23% of people that were basically left with next to nothing. Many more were grossly underinsured after the fires. And I would dare to say, from our own experience, these numbers would actually be far worse in those worst affected communities, because of course the best or most frequently insured homes would be in the larger cities, and large number of the people who I came across during my work with Architects Assist, perhaps 50% were actually underinsured grossly or not insured at all. So in reaction to, or in response to the fires, about a year and a half now, we started an Architects Assist, which was meant to be a platform for equity of access to architecture. I wonder whether this little window is obstructing everyone's screen. I'm sorry, I don't know how to get rid of it. So what led me to this was a belief that like healthcare and legal representation, sustainable and resilient architecture is not a luxury, but the prerequisite to our future survival and kind of a human right. At the time when these fires were happening, we actually just moved out of our own house rental into this little caravan in a search for our own little home. And instead we ended up being what I might call a climate refugee, basically running away from the various fire fronts through thick cloud from place to place across New South Wales, Victoria, and so on. So we started this organization 4th January in 2020. It was a basic, simple website with a couple of forms where architects could offer pro bono help to the bushfire victims, and where those affected by the bushfires could directly ask for some assistance, and all the matching of the architects and the bushfire affected people would be done manually by myself, my wife. Luckily, on 15th January, on the 9th January, the Australian Institute of Architects came on board and assisted us with developing a website that was handling these inquiries automatically, as well as the registrations, and the whole process could be more streamlined. In February, the Australian Institute of Landscape Architects and Planning Institute Australia joined in, and other industries such as the Structural Engineers of Australia and I think interior designers and others have started their own similar services. In August and September 2020, just after the lockdowns, so the first lockdowns kind of ended, me and my wife have traveled Victoria, New South Wales, and South Australia, sort of visiting all the affected regions, spreading awareness of the services available, providing some initial advice, perhaps directing people to local architects willing to help, government institutions, and so on. So here are some pictures. Needless to say, even just listening to Tricia this evening, it sort of was a very emotional experience. And yeah, we have seen a lot of the unfortunate impact that the fires had in the communities. This is just a quick statistics. So in the one and a half year of operation of the service of the Re-Architects Assist. We've had 17,000 people visit the website, and perhaps about half of them has engaged in some way or another with the content, requested help, and so on. In March this year, the organization Architects Assist was completely taken over by the Australian Institute of Architects, and I continue acting as an external advisor. We have currently 617 member firms right across Australia. Obviously, most of them are located in larger cities. Many, though, are also regional offices. One thing before I forget would be that if anyone is looking to engage one of our architects, do consider inquiring with those from your capital city. They tend to be more available for pro bono work than those few practices that are local to the regions worst affected, because of course they are more overwhelmed with all the work coming in oftentimes. So how this works is basically the domain name or the website sits at architectsassist.com.au. There's a provider directory where you can find suitable architecture or other services providers via a search or a map. And then there's a simple assistance request form you can fill out, or ideally call the practice on a provided phone number. Another option is to call directly the Institute of Architects. Their number is in the contact section, and they will be able to match you directly with the most suitable practice willing to help. After you've made these initial contacts, the architect or architecture firm will contact you and assess your situation. They will make recommendations, suggest the roadmap, next steps, and of course, as appropriate, may agree on an extent of any free or discounted services that are available to you from that particular practice. We have served all kinds of clients or clients in all kinds of situations. So, for instance, we had individuals who have been completely uninsured, basically left with nothing, living off their car if they even had the car left after the fire fronts went through. So, of course, those people would be served typically completely pro bono. They'd be also assisted in sourcing funds from a variety of grants or material donations and so on. But we also are happy to talk to people who have essentially fairly good financial security and have been insured well and have the means to rebuild, but are just looking for some initial advice and guidance, because of course navigating this terrain may be fairly confusing for anybody. We also work for local businesses, communities, even communes. This is more about rebuilding community assets, such as community halls, churches, tourist facilities, and other things that are essential for the life of the communities. Let's just share some challenges that I have come across in my work. That's chiefly misunderstood or misinterpreted Australian Standard 3959, which is the standard which guides basic requirements for buildings built in a bushfire-prone areas. A lot of times also our architects had to reject working in conditions which I would say may not be completely suitable or at all realistic to rebuild in. There's been lots of several examples I'm aware of where buildings have been built informally without any permits in the middle of the thickest bush, and of course there's no way the same can be legally rebuilt, designed by an architect and so on. There's a whole pile of liability issues. So sometimes the unreasonable intentions or expectations may prevent otherwise a good project going ahead. So something to be aware of the stricter legislation that, of course, is becoming each year more stringent and yeah. Delays in clearing sites was a big one. I hope now 1.5 years later all the sites have been cleared, by the variety of organizations responsible, but in the initial, even 6-7 months later after the fires, many of the sites have not been cleared, and it was a big problem with any kind of renewal or rebuilding. Of course, the tendency, the omnipresent tendency towards quick fix shall be right solutions, a dangerous approach to take in reconstructing, particularly near the bushfire risks. Lack of awareness amongst many of the people. I would almost say, again, the people worst affected, typically in more remote areas, oftentimes quite, I would say older generation, right? Not very good access to the internet, or not really fluent using the internet. Yeah, it was quite. It's one of the biggest challenges, really, just spreading the word. I suspect many of those would also not be present at this seminar. So if any of you knows about anyone who might need help, who is not so fluent with the internet, please do help them and direct them, or maybe moderate, or I suppose, yeah, take them through our website, make the phone call for them, please. Try to get them in touch with the architects. And then, of course, the passionate initial response versus the consistent long-term effort that is a problem in any kind of relief work. There's an interesting exhibition about the work done through architects, Assist and other architects in a bushfire recovery, and lots of learning. That's probably quite useful to read through or look at. This is the website 3959, which is the number of the Australian standard. But yeah, so this is a probably domain name or website worth visiting and learning from what others have been through. And lastly, a few ideas very quickly about how we may possibly go forward. And these are just my private notions, but I think it would be best that we better our environmental management and modes of occupation of land, and better design and construction, of course. So there's a bit of an approach in the environmental protection in Australia at the moment, where a lot of the so-called national parks or crown land is left to just be on its own. Oftentimes it's regrowth, and during my tour through the state's worst affected areas and so on, I've noticed that it was usually the mismanaged or undermanaged or basically uncared for land that was most prone to the worst fires, that basically taken everything in their path. So abandonment is not preservation, of course, of the environment. Humans are an essential part of the ecosystem. There's a strong history of Aboriginal cultural burning in this country, and that's something that's certainly worth supporting and enhancing and learning from for the future. Conscious, intentional, integrated landscape management. A landscape like this, where village, productive land and wilderness coexist, is entirely a possibility in Australia, and would probably help reduce the fire danger. So better modes of occupation of the land as well. Neither isolation or overcrowding is really sustainable. A lot of people live a sustainable dream of an isolated little house in the middle of wilderness. Of course, those kinds of dwellings are extremely vulnerable. So small environmentally conscious settlements units is something that I think might be the way of future, also with the growing population. Things like eco-villages, hamlets are now more realistic, sustainable and resilient alternatives. With things like off-grid electricity, waste management, transport, and remote working being quite realistic these days, increasingly so. New legislation is needed for that. The New South Wales State Planning Policy 15 about rural land sharing was quite useful for a while. I think we need to do more in that direction, make it more easy basically for groups of people to start small settlements and hamlets and live sustainably in a more of a communal setting with local economies, sense of ownership, belonging, and continuity, not just the transient occupation of landscape. This is what an eco-village might look like. And better design and construction of individual buildings. Holistic design includes landscaping for resilience, very important in terms of The fire resistance actually of buildings is the landscape around it, almost more important than building itself. And then, of course, landscaping for sustainability and sustenance, water retention, fire retardant and productive plants, restorative design, endemic design, locally sourced materials tend to perform best in the local environments. And one of the things that I would mention, one of the last things I'd mention is one of the materials that I'm really passionate about is hempcrete, which is a mix of industrial hemp with lime and sand. And it has all these amazing properties such as carbon sequestration from the atmosphere. It's essentially carbon negative in buildings. It can be locally produced, fixes soils. Is something that could bring a lot of money to the farming sector in times of drought. It's recyclable, pest and fire resistant, carbon neutral, negative, controls moisture within buildings, is retrofittable, and it's affordable, relatively affordable. So hempcrete is something I would direct anybody who hasn't heard of it to look at as a building material if you're considering rebuilding or building a new building sustainably and in a fire resistant way. And a few links for you to consider. Looking at is, of course, the Architect's Assist. If you would like any assistance or help with designing your new home or repairing one that has been damaged in the fires or other disaster. Cohousing.com.au is some ideas on how the occupation of the landscape might occur in the future. And Hemblock Australia, I'm not affiliated with this company, but I find them very exciting addition to the hempcrete scene in Australia. These are essentially blocks that you can build a house from, as opposed to using more traditional ways of building from hempcrete, which can be quite laborious. So Hemblock Australia is something worth looking at. And that is it. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Jiri. Thank you, Tricia, and thank you, Paul. I will just share my screen. Good evening, everyone. I'm Jenny, and as you probably noted in the introduction, I'm a scientist, not an architect. And I've been specialising in energy efficiency in the housing industry for 12 years now on the land of the Ngunnawal people here in Canberra. I have no training in architecture, as I've mentioned, but I've got a great appreciation for what architecture has to offer. And that, I think, is because I grew up in two very modest but architect design homes as a child in Tasmania. So to my parents, who were just a school teacher, my mum was a school teacher, and my dad worked in ground crew at the airport. When they had the opportunity to build on vacant land, they thought it was sensible to invest in some design expertise. And that had a really significant impact on me that I didn't really appreciate until later in my career. So I employ a talented team of architects who share my philosophy for smaller, smarter, sustainable homes. And during January of 2020, several of them were directly impacted by the fires. They and their family members, several of them were trapped down by the coast. But in particular, my principal architect, Sarah Lebner, who's the National Emerging Architect of 2020, had a really harrowing experience. She is from Corryong, as is her husband. They're both from farming families, and they were home at the time of the fires. To cut a really long story short, Sarah's husband's family lost their house early on in the fire drama, and then their energy was focused on trying to save Sarah's family home and farm. Sarah managed to evacuate alone with her 18-month-old toddler in a small window of opportunity, and then had to sit in Canberra and watch things unfold. The good news is that their farm and their family home did survive. But so the fires had a really significant, as I know, they've significantly impacted many people, but it really awoke a deep interest for us. We'd done some bushfire work before, but it really brought things home. And for a while, it felt like Lighthouse was a smoke house. But enough background. I would like to move on to some more positive and proactive things next. So Firstly, I want to talk about building a team to build your new home. I've already told you I'm not an architect, I'm a scientist, but I also want to stress that I'm not a fire expert. And I think one of the most important things I've learned during my career in science and in the housing industry is that we as individuals can't possibly know everything. And we operate as a real detriment to ourselves and our clients if we pretend we do know everything. So there are huge gains to be made from collaborating with other disciplines and other specialists. So the synergy of collective thinking is very real. In spring of 2019, so before the fires, I wrote an article for Sanctuary magazine about how to choose a builder, and you can see a screen capture of that in the slide. I used that article to stress that no builder on their own is the complete solution to getting a great home. In it, I explain that you really want to choose a designer or an architect first and an energy assessor before you choose a builder. I also stress that you want all of these professionals to be really good communicators and you want them to be willing to collaborate and work as a team. Had I written that article a year later, I would have included bushfire consultants as an important potential member of that team. So I encourage you to read that article and do add bushfire consultant to it. And I've only just realised now that I forgot to put energy assessor in the heading of this slide, but I do think that's a really valuable input as well.
Jenny, your
Yes.
slides are not showing.
Oh, you're kidding. Sorry, everybody.
So if we could just take a moment to get the slides on, that would be great. Oh, there.
Okay. Apologies, everybody. We did a special check on a new feature that I learned tonight, and somehow I've let you down. So you've only missed two slides. So we're on to the third one now, if you wouldn't mind. Thank you. Cool. Oh, now I've put down my notes. Apologies, everyone. So secondly, I want to talk about how we aim for energy efficiency and bushfire safety. So following the fires, when Lighthouse felt like Smokehouse, Sarah, my principal architect, and some other members of our team collaborated with a local bushfire consultant, Jeff Dow from Emcee Bushfire Consulting, to update an information document for the Australian Institute of Architects. This document is a useful summary or intro document that should be read in conjunction with a few other documents, and it refers to those within itself. So do check it out, and we'll include links to all of these documents too. I'm not going to go into any detail here, but I just want to highlight that the process of preparing this document just reinforced the way we were already doing things, but added this extra lens through which we looked at things, and that was that bushfire lens. So you really have to think holistically about a house and its environment. You must consider the landscape carefully to both maximise energy efficiency, but also to ensure you're minimising the fire risks. You've got to consider access into, out of, and through your home and through your property. A house is a complex system. So insulation, air leakage, windows, condensation, ventilation, air quality, all have to be considered together in a home if you're serious about creating something that's energy efficient, thermally comfortable, and healthy. Now, when you add the bushfire lens over the top of those things, sometimes things need a bit of tweaking, but generally they work pretty well together. So we've found that you don't have to adapt things greatly to achieve both energy efficiency and good bushfire safety. So really my key message here is that there's no one national solution on how to comply with the bushfire requirements of the National Construction Code and your local government regulations. Australia is a very big country with vastly different climatic conditions and highly varied forms of construction. So you really need to think about your local context. So I think the one rule that we should apply, and let's call it Jenny's law for fun, is that you must work with a team who know and understand your particular climate and landscape and the regulations, of course. Finally, how do you achieve all of this? If we can switch the next slide. how do you keep the costs down without compromising on the energy efficiency and the fire safety of your home? So a few quick tips. Number one, keep the design simple. A house can still be beautiful if it's a simple design. So a rectangular house with a simple skillion roof is one of the cheapest ways to build. And I stress, it can still be beautiful. Make it space efficient as well as energy efficient. You really don't need as much space as most people imagine. You can fit a 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom home into 150 square metres or less. I live and breathe that. I'm sitting in my own 150 square metre 4x2 home at the moment. And be prepared to compromise on some things to get quality in other parts of your home. So a classic example, quality windows will serve you much better in terms of thermal comfort and fire safety than a stone bench top, for example. And think carefully about the items that you can remove or delay if you can't afford them as a part of the initial build. So you don't have to have everything in the initial build contract. We often will leave out joinery or the storage in bedrooms to do later, maybe the deck or the pergola paving, garage doors. So think of clever ways to keep costs down. Wrapping up, I strongly encourage you to work collaboratively with your builder and your designer to ensure that the design is going to be affordable and comfortable and healthy. And of course, don't forget to include input from the energy efficiency and bushfire consultants. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny, and Jiri and Paul, and Maya for the slides. Now, questions. I'll give a question. I have a question for Jenny to start with, but if any of you that are listening have questions to add to the Q&A now, that would be wonderful. My question, Jenny, it relates to something you said toward the end of your presentation, where you talked about having people involved that know your area. And a lot of us are in areas that don't have architects and may have a builder, may likely not have a builder. So how do you go about finding someone like that when you're in a small remote community?
Yeah, look, I understand it is much more difficult, but access networks, for example, we're a member of the Institute of Architects, and Jiri's already talked about them. Architects Assist is a great way to find the architects. Builders, I would tap into networks through the Master Builders Association, the Housing Industry Association. Look in Sanctuary and Renew, you'll find examples of builders who have done work in more remote or regional areas. They would be the key resources I tap into, and I actually mentioned that in that article, how to choose a builder or find a builder, some ways to help you with that. But yeah, it's certainly more difficult. I hope that the builders, builders are very busy at the moment, but I think there are quite a lot of them out there who are passionately interested in energy efficiency and fire safety. It just might take a little bit of research to find them, but it's worth looking for them.
Great, thank you, Jenny. Thanks. There is one question here. Nayan Das says, my apology for this long question. However, this is perhaps a question targeted to all the respected panelists today. How a building practitioner who comes from diverse backgrounds, such as from fenestration industry, energy consultant, etc., can contribute to rebuilding and making our community resilient. It's good to see the initiative like Architect Assist, but is there any other way or medium where people can contribute through providing their time and sharing engineering, technical, admin skills, etc.?
I can answer that one. Yeah.
Okay.
So I know there's in each region there's these bushfire recovery centers, typically run by someone associated with the council. Sometimes it's a local community group. So that's always the best point of first contact, particularly if you're an individual builder or a tradesman or anyone of that kind who, just sort of because your area of work is obviously limited, say 100 kilometers. So yeah, that'll be the best start, and there'll be always people who need assistance, and these bushfire recovery centers will put you in touch for sure with those in need.
Can I also add that your architect or your designer is a great resource in that they do have links to all those sorts of specialists, to engineers, and they should, hopefully they know a lot about windows and things. So they can be the person who facilitates a lot of those things for you. Architects have a lot of skill to offer projects and people.
The way I understood the question was perhaps maybe it was wrong, but I thought the gentleman was asking whether or how he as a builder could offer help. So
yes,
yeah.
So getting in touch with Architects Assist would be perhaps one of the ways of connecting in with what needed to be done. Possibly. All right, we have another question from Lulu Taylor. Thank you for this great toolkit. Okay, Paul and the rest at Renew. A tree, here's a story. A tree recently fell on my house, and as part of the insurance process, a bell rating was provided by a structural engineer from Queensland. My property is in mid-north coast, New South Wales. My property was given an FZ rating, that's fire zone or flame zone rating, as trees are within 100 meters. Are bell ratings so simplistic that there is such a blanket approach? My house is pretty defensible, especially compared to my neighbors whose bell ratings are much lower. The 2019 fires came within 20 centimeters of my house, but was saved by firefighters. Thanks in advance, Louise. So the question about bell ratings, I figured there might be a question about that. There seem to be only, 5 ratings? Now, is there any nuance?
Yeah. So it's a bit of a tricky one, but it's all based on the slope, on the type of vegetation, and the local conditions or the typical conditions. And so trees to be in a farm. Sorry?
Can I interrupt for just a second? I should say that BAL means bushfire attack level. Is that right?
Yeah. So bushfire attack level. Yeah. So the main thing for bushfire attack level is that the effects is, of course, type of vegetation, how close it is, and the slope, whether it's downslope and how steep that slope is. And so to be in a fire zone, you basically have to be almost encapsulated by high bushfire hazard type of vegetation. So it's reasonably extreme situation. If I would say if your house was, or your house site was deemed as such, I would say the first point of contact would be to talk to an architect and just see what their opinion is. I haven't seen this particular site. I wouldn't say that the standard itself operates in overly blanket manner, but it's obviously a standard. So each situation is slightly different. The standard always errs on the side of caution. It's always a bit conservative for a good reason. But yeah, I would talk to a local architect, show them a few pictures of your site. They should be able to advise whether there's a chance of in any way maybe reducing that hazard, or sometimes the fire zone rating affects only 1 or 2 sides of the house. So there's all kinds of things you can do from there. But yeah, talk to a local architect, I would say.
Yeah, I would say a local architect again, and but also those bushfire consultants. So in our case, if you spoke to our firm, we would put you in touch with a consultant that can do a really good analysis of the site, because as Jiri said, sometimes we've had a project where one corner of the house was classed as flame zone, but the rest of the property was not so bad. It really can be very helpful to you as a client to thoroughly understand why the property or that the site has got that rating. Yeah, it's all done with good intentions, but yeah, seek that expert help to better understand.
Great. Thank you, Jenny and Jiri. We have a question from Melissa. She says, we lost everything in the December 2019 fires in Sarsfield. 2 homes, all shedding, fences, wildflower plantation, and infrastructure. So we are starting from ground zero. We have a local building designer on board, and he is well connected to local resources, which are incredibly thinly stretched these days. And we have begun to speak with the builder. We are really interested in maximizing this opportunity to ensure best practice sustainability and passive solar energy efficiency, and of course, meeting our BEL 29 assessment. How do you put all of that together? Says Melissa. Good question. Who wants to give that? Jenny first, okay.
I guess it came back to my second slide, which you didn't see until a bit later, but we're building that team. So that expertise does exist. Again, your designer should have some ideas on energy efficiency consultants to help him optimize the design to make sure you're factoring in good solar passive design and you're getting your glazing areas right. So find the energy efficiency assessor. There are 3 organisations that oversee or accredit energy assessors across Australia, and I'm sure somewhere on the Sanctuary or Renew website there'll be a link through to those. I can provide one later. So tap into that. So it just does take that little bit of investment in time to build that team of people to work together initially. And I know it can feel overwhelming and hard, but there are people out there to help.
Great. And I liked what you said about synergy and thinking holistically about the project. And I guess that's what the questioner was saying, really, was that I thought the whole thing.
Yes.
And it's interestingly, it could be the one time in your life that you do have the whole thing in play at once. And it can be overwhelming. So reach out to someone and start there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Jiri or Paul, did you have anything that you wanted to, Jiri?
Just to add to this, I guess I mentioned it in what the Architects Assist members do. And so this is one of those things. This is what I would call the roadmap, basically. So I would say anyone would qualify, even if you have had an insurance payout and so on, anyone would qualify for a pro bono advice or a session where you could get sort of step-by-step or a checklist of first talk to this consultant, then talk to that one, or these are the ones that you need. So for something like this, I would encourage everyone to get in touch with the Architects Assist members and get a roadmap for your particular case. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, that's a good idea. Paul? Yeah.
I think these are all great answers. I'm learning loads as well. It's great. But I just wanted to mention that one of the things that we're going to be adding to the Green Rebuild Toolkit over over the coming weeks and months is going to be precisely this kind of clearinghouse for suppliers and networks who can support. And we're looking to build that over time. So it probably won't be comprehensive on the very first day, but do keep checking back on greenrebuildtoolkit.com, where we're going to build this kind of resource. So hopefully local action networks, architects, suppliers, and so on who can help. We'll just produce some lists that should help point you in the right direction.
That's great. A great resource, combined with the resources that Architects Assist has and people in Jenny's realm. That's fantastic. Now, another question we've got here is, thanks for the great presentations. Are the 2019 and 20 bushfires resulting in any changes to the building code? It may be early days for that just now, but have you heard, Jiri, as an architect, or Jenny in your work?
Yeah, so we have like the main document that directs the implications is the Australian standard for building in bushfire prone areas, and the latest edition is, I believe, 2018, and there may have been a later revision, but the current edition is 2018. I'm not aware of any like very specific implications, but I'm sure there will be some. But ultimately, the last fires were horrific, but it has happened before. So as we go each year, we learn something new. Each fire we learn something new. I suppose new materials are coming on the scene. So oftentimes it's not new materials. Sometimes it's really discovering what we have used in the past. So nothing I can say specifically. I would say simple Google search will probably reveal, but nothing dramatic. That's what I would say. Nothing dramatic will change. The standard itself works quite well if it's well understood. So it's currently available for free, I believe, which is uncommon for standards. Usually you have to pay about $200 for most of them, sometimes more. The Bushfire standard has been made free of charge to the community. So you're able to Google it and download it from the internet. It reads okay, I suppose. With the minimum technical understanding, you should be able to have a read and get some sort of insight in the basic implications. It's usually things like sealing all the cavities in your house, so embers can't enter, because I think well over 90% of all homes lost in bushfires is due to embers, not direct exposure to fires. So that's one of the bigger things, that you can't basically allow the embers that fly sometimes kilometers away from the fire front to enter the cavities of your house. And then it's things like, in the higher bushfire ratings, it's things like fire resistance of materials. So those are the core things, I suppose. And then there's things like provision of firefighting equipment, water, and so on. But yeah, short answer, which I should have given, is perhaps nothing too dramatic will change anytime soon.
Right. Thank you, Jiri. Jenny, did you have something that you wanted to?
No, I totally agree. I think what we've got at the moment actually works pretty well, and I haven't heard of any moves to make any big changes. I think again, people are just a lot more aware of it now. Yes. With every big fire season. Yeah.
Right. Thanks.
If I can add one really important thing to realize is that the Australian standard, or the Bell rating, is really just a guidance, but nobody can guarantee that you will not lose your home if you live anywhere near a vegetation that is highly bushfire prone. So if you can see bush from your window, the risk that the home will be lost again in a decade or two is there, and that's just part of living in Australia, I suppose. So we shouldn't have the feeling of safety if we have done everything so to speak correctly. We should always realize that this risk is always there, and big part of it is management of the landscape. I touched on it in my presentation.
Right. Totally. The last thing we want is people to think that we're able to design fireproof homes, because you can't at all. And yeah, the conditions on the day play a huge role. And again, yeah, to completely agree with Jiri, the landscape plays a huge part in things.
Mm. And getting into future webinars in this series, we'll be talking about not just of homes that need to be completely rebuilt, but what we can do to revisit our own current houses and make them more prepared for what might occur in the future. Yeah. I know that was really what we took on we're living in about a 50-year-old house here, which was double brick, but other than that, it didn't have an awful lot going for it. So we've insulated and double glazed the windows and done a lot of things that are both for energy efficiency and sustainability, future proofing, I call it. So, but also future proofing around that. We haven't done so well around the outside of our property at this stage, but we certainly do understand where the risks are. So yeah, so stay tuned to other seminars. Let's look at another question here. Local knowledge, yes. Local knowledge is essential in the design process. As a designer, there is so much to consider through the whole process. Question is, how do we arrange a more comprehensive database of designers and fire hazard consultants to leverage local knowledge? And so that's around the designers. I think
Yes, I
this
think
is all
that's
about that.
yeah. Again, it's a great question. It's really important because nothing can substitute for genuine local knowledge.
Yeah.
We're looking to build these kind of resources into our Green Rebuild Toolkit. There are other professional associations also who are able to help from their knowledge. But I think it's always going to be very hard to get a comprehensive database of every single individual. But hopefully, a couple of resources that you can hunt into, and we'll find the right approach.
I like Jiri's idea of a caravan that's mobile and can you need a designer? Here's one that will be local soon. So next question from Jody. Can you suggest a website to find a list of bushfire consultants, please? Everyone wants that network. So we've talked about some of them. Can we go through that again? Potential websites that of people that have some specialty or have current experience in bushfire.
I don't know if there is a central list of the bushfire consultants, to be honest. We happen to have a good one locally, and he works in our region that we've collaborated with. He's not the only one, but I'm sure the RFS in New South Wales is pretty well organised. I would think there'd be lists somewhere. Gosh, that's the sort of thing I should have looked up before this webinar. We can check that out. Jiri probably knows.
Okay.
You're saying the right thing. There is a list. You can access it through the RFS. There's I also work in Tasmania, so we have a state body that provides a directory. There's about, goodness, I don't remember, maybe 50 or so many consultants. So yeah. Something to be aware of is that some consultants will visit the site and many others still do your assessment from satellite images. Yeah. It will cost you a couple of $100 assessment like that, but I wouldn't recommend it unless your house is clearly well away from anywhere that could be possibly on fire. So if you do live anywhere near bush, anywhere near somewhere where the fire front could come through, like, I would say, yeah, make sure that you're getting a consultant who is able to visit the site.
I agree completely.
Yeah, good idea. And that's not an easy ask when you live 7 hours away, excuse me, from major cities. Well, but Jenny, Canberra is closer, 4.5 hours.
Yeah, that's right.
Can I just
oh, sorry, yeah.
Sorry, just before we have another question, can I just mention that next week, one of the webinars is specifically on landscaping around the home for bushfire resilience. So for Melissa and others who are looking at this issue, that might be a useful webinar to come along to, or look up the recording afterwards.
Yeah,
great.
I think what Jenny said, again, just to say, the local fire brigade will always be the best starting point if you are in doubt about bushfire consultants. Oftentimes they actually have their own. And in New South Wales, it's also the Rural Fire Service that scrutinize some of the bushfire reports anyway, as you go through the approval process. So yeah, the local fire station, first point of contact.
That's a good source, you're right. Clean Pete says, asks the question, really difficult to build in FZ these days. I've heard that many councils won't issue a planning permit if it's in FZ. Is this true?
What have you heard, Jiri?
Yeah, okay. So yeah, I'll have a go. So yeah, not really, it's not a blanket rule, but the costs of building in fire in a flame zone is are often prohibitive. Just to have, for example, and we're talking fireproof now, not fire resisting, say windows. It can be $100,000, just the cheapest option, which could be the fire shutters for your windows. And there's all kinds of screens that you can buy, but it can easily double or triple cost of a building and the building there. So it comes to mostly affordability. You can build anywhere. You can build on a edge of a volcano, but the cost will be astronomical, of course. So that's the consideration, I suppose. So, but yeah, no, I haven't heard of a council that would just issue a blanket restriction on like not building in a certain area. Yeah.
In fact, I'd actually heard a little bit of sort of the opposite, that in one area on the south coast, and I may have this wrong, but I heard that some blocks that had been classed as flame zone were only being required to build to BAL 40. Yeah, just to bring costs down, but I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which would be reasonable because, like I said earlier, any house can burn down, and sometimes it actually doesn't make sense to impose the flame zone rules. Sometimes it's better to live in a tent and be ready to leave when there's fires. It's far more economical, entirely realistic in some parts of Australia, and better than building a concrete bunker.
Yeah.
Okay. I have something, it's kind of a case study from Eva. I'm going to read it, and I'll ask the speakers to take it from there to give feedback on it. There is no question in it, but I suspect it's the subtext. Thank you, Jenny. Our house was not burnt. All our surrounding land was. We still wish to renovate our home so that it is more bushfire resilient. We're putting in double glazing and recladding the whole house with new weatherboards and insulation, plus better insulation in the ceiling. The existing extensions to the house date to 1990, need a lot of this kind of work, and they are on stilts, so leaving room for embers to enter. The original 1910 house is a stone house on concrete slab. We thought to put sprinklers on the roof and surround the house with a blue line with stand impact sprinklers every so many meters around the house, fed by 90,000 liter tank water and petrol pumps. And then she adds, sorry, our property is in Blackheath, Blue Mountains of New South Wales, and halfway down a steep slope and above a hanging swamp. So
challenging site.
There is a challenging location. What advice have you got for Eva?
Do the best you can. And I think she's pointed out the big issue is, and as Jiri mentioned, that protecting from ember attack is one of the most important things to increasing the chances of your house surviving. When you're up on stilts, that can be much harder, but whether you invest in that perimeter sprinklers or not, whether that's actually going to make the difference or not on a really hot, windy day, it's such a hard call. And I know that's not particularly helpful, but get that expert help, talk to the local fire brigade, talk to a bushfire consultant, and try and make that judgment about what's actually sensible or cost effective. Because you can spend a lot, as Jiri's mentioned, a lot of money, and it doesn't guarantee things. And just being aware of that as an issue, and helping you then to read the conditions. If we have a terrible bushfire season again, and you having a clear idea of, if the weather's like this, then I'm out of here. The risk is just too high. That's a very roundabout non-answer. But just acknowledging it's really complex.
Yeah. Okay. Anything from Paul or Jiri in that? Yeah. Yes, Jiri.
Just a note. Yeah, I agree with Jenny completely. But I heard petrol pumps, and I believe that the diesel pumps are better for firefighting. Diesel doesn't ignite as easily, and so on. But yeah, it's always a fine balance between the investment and what you get for it. It never gives you complete security. Also, as I've toured, these tens and tens of villages and towns affected by the fires, I actually must say that a lot of the houses I've seen that were standing amongst houses that were not anymore were equipped with the sprinklers. So I've actually been quite surprised how efficient they were in the firefighting. Resisting the fire front. The thing is, the sprinklers themselves don't protect the house. They kind of act like an additional person or two with a fire hose. So typically they worked best if the house owner was still there defending, and the sprinklers basically enabled the other side of the house to be also wetted down as he was protecting, say, the side facing the fire, or vice versa. And important thing about sprinklers, like I had a comment on the pumps, is that it's important that the sprinklers are a kind that creates a larger droplets that resist the wind, because of course when the fire is coming through, you wouldn't believe the wind that, I mean, many of you unfortunately would have actually seen it firsthand, but yeah, so we need big droplets. So these sprinklers are very different to those that you typically buy, and actually quite hard to buy. I've been trying to find them online. It's pretty difficult to find good sprinkler system for this sort of bushfire scenarios, and also all the pipes and everything has to be ideally fire resisting, or copper or something expensive. So it can go quite high up in price as well. So, but yeah, anyway, my 2 cents to that.
Okay, thank you, Jiri. Steve has a question. How are asset protection zones and their management to be monitored into the future? A zone, for instance, a zone can be approved for construction, though a few years later, the management zone could be overgrown and a hazard. So this is about management of the environment.
Because it depends how diligent the local authorities are, really, I guess, in monitoring things. I think increasingly the communities themselves will help look after these areas. Again, the old raising of awareness and greater understanding of the importance of management of these areas. Yeah, but I guess the answer is hopefully they will be, but yeah, we'll have to wait and see.
One of the things that we found in our town is that the fence lines between residential properties were the wick that lit the fire in the property, in the homes, and often not on the home. I mean, it could even be cleared on one side and the other person, I mean, the fence between them. So whether it's a wooden fence or the grass and things that have grown up in the fence along the way, just, yeah, they turned into wicks, which, so it's not just what we do within the home. It's not quite yet to what Jiri is talking about the environment around our homes. There's something that, yeah, we need to consider the whole package, don't we?
For sure.
The issue I've been struggling sometimes with getting homes approved or bushfire measures approved is that the council actually will make you to sort of form your proposal based on the assumption that you don't have control over your neighboring properties. So if there's a set protection zone in your bushfire plan, it has to be completely contained within your boundaries. So it's hard to get things approved relying on your neighbors' continuous management of their asset protection zones. And another thing is houses that I've seen burned down sometimes sometimes caught fire from neighboring houses. So if your house can be, say Bell 12.5, sort of low risk on one side, and I think that triggers the other sides to be the same actually. But let's say the house next door is only 2 meters away from yours, and that will turn into a torch because, for instance, it hasn't been lived in for 2 years, and that's a serious risk, and it's just you can't do much about that really. It's one of those really difficult parts of preparing for fire.
That's one of the related to that is the you mentioned insurance, I think, Jiri. Reading your insurance documents very, very carefully, because one of the things that a number of residents found is that if there was no flame, there was considered to be no fire. So you could have melted cladding or loss of something, but if you didn't have actual flame, then the insurance was very challenging. So read the document very carefully. If you haven't been affected in your house, it's still worth knowing what it says in there, hiding in the detail.
Yeah, that's a good point. And again, our experience from this tour that we did was incredible. How many people told us they were standing in front of their house, spraying down things that were combusting spontaneously, And when the fire front was passed, they realized that, say, plastic pipes and shovel handles and things were melted behind them. So our bodies somehow, with the evaporative action of the skin, sort of have the ability to survive far greater heat than plastic weatherboards on your house. The whole house can be melting behind you, and you can still be fighting the fire right in front of you and thinking everything's sort of under control. And then you look back and your house is kind of crying. Plastic. So yeah.
So what else have we got? Oh, does anyone use batteries to run fire pumps? That's an interesting one.
Not common. It's typically because it depends where the batteries are, but firstly you need quite a strong battery system, but the supply can be easily interrupted. So the idea behind the diesel pumps is that it's all contained unit. You have everything under control. If it stops working, you can run to the pump, see what's happened, why isn't it working, you can fix it in one spot. If you have batteries here and a pump there, and it's just an additional weakness and more links in the system that can break.
Okay. Basil has a question. I want to build into a slope, but concerned about termite prevalence and moisture. Have you got any ideas?
Find a good architect and they will help you with all of those details. I kid you not, this is architects are across, waterproofing and termite management and all of those things. They really are trained to think holistically and solve that big all those problems. So it can be done. So yeah, find a good architect and they should be able to help you with that sort of stuff.
Right.
But generally, I would say if you're building in a slope, which is something I've been preoccupying myself with at times, if you're building into a slope, and I'm understanding this is an earth sheltered home, all you need is obviously to have some air circulation. So typically you would have some openings, be it forced ventilation or just little courtyards at the back of your house. Some kind of light wells which enable the air to be sucked in through the front and released through the back or vice versa. It's good for cooling as well.
Yeah.
Great. Eva says, one of the best ways to prepare and defend a neighborhood or village is to have a collaborative such as we have here in the Upper Mountains called HUF, Head Up for Fire, where a facilitator in an area keeps in touch with their neighbors and gets to know their particular circumstances and how to assist them in times of fire emergency. So again, that's back, Jenny, to the collaborative approach, communities helping community. And
yeah, really good. And I think that's certainly from my principal architect Sarah's experience in Corryong. I know that the Corryong community now are much better connected and sharing information and resources. Yes, really, really powerful if you've got that collaborative community support.
Yeah. Well, are there, we've got one question that's here, I think we've really answered. It's about changes to the building code. Are there any other final notes from Jenny, Jiri, and Paul in summing up what you've heard or nope. Okay.
Can I just say one thing that's really, really nice and really inspiring here, which is that so many people in the chat have made great suggestions as well. It's testament to an amazing community where everyone wants to help. And then there's other people who are here, asking straightforward questions and wanting to learn. And it's really good to be able to match, all of those people up. And thank you to everyone who's asked questions, who's made suggestions, because that'll help us improve the toolkit, help us add resources to the toolkit, and make sure that it's actually serving what people actually need on the ground. So just thanking everyone for their contributions.
Absolutely. And I do as well. And I apologize to those in the chat for not including those. I'm keeping my eye on the Q&A and the chat will be part of the recording as well. So I understand. So I've been watching as they go past, but I can't actually read more than about the first 2 or 3 words. So it's great to see. And we still have 131 participants at the end of our time. So I just want to say thank you very, very much. Before we go on to the final, the final two slides that will tell us about the future. Let's just make sure that I've got first, thank you to Jenny, Jiri, and Paul, all three of you, for giving of your time and immense knowledge and expertise. And it's been fantastic from my side. Thank you very much. And I want to walk everyone through and go to the two last slides now. Looking at what Paul mentioned at the start, the upcoming webinars. And then we will look at something about the toolkit. Okay, here we are with there. Can we go back to that's it. Thank you. So thank you for joining us, as I say, and there are other webinars. So tomorrow night, it's designing and building for bushfire and climate resilience. On Thursday, it's materials and construction for bushfire and climate resilience. And then on next Tuesday, home energy setups for bushfire zones and climate resilience. And the 9th of June on Wednesday, water storage and fire resistant landscaping. And the final one on Thursday week, retrofitting for fire resistance. And the final slide is about the speed dating that was mentioned, Paul mentioned that. Do you want to tell us? So there it is. Paul, why don't you do this slide?
Sure, it's a pleasure. So a series of speed data sustainability expert events will be held. So the idea behind these is there's a point in your in your rebuild or your renovation when it's not at the beginning and it's not at the end, but times in the middle where you have really specific particular questions where you really need to inform yourself and get some expert input. And the idea here is that we broker an event where you can sit down, we bring a group of designers, builders, other forms of experts together, maybe 15 or 20 different people, and you can book yourself in for, you know, a 15-minute chat with this person, a 15-minute chat with that person, and go through and get your questions directly answered by an expert on the spot. So these will be starting in July, and the bookings will go up on the website soon. They're going to be online, so anyone can attend, but we are going to make sure we give priority to people rebuilding in this from bushfire affected areas. But please look out for those. We know that a lot of people who've come to these events in the past have reported they find them really helpful, and they also form connections with local suppliers as well, which can often be as much use as the advice you get as well. So hopefully some people will find those useful, but watch out for information on those on the website shortly. Great,
Thanks, Paul. I figured you'd be able to do that better than I could just reading through it. So, thank you everyone for participating. I hope we'll see you again tomorrow evening. And I think with that, it is now, my watch says 25 after 7. So we've managed the time pretty much to be within time. I've enjoyed doing the hosting here tonight. I hope to see you back tomorrow. So bye-bye for now.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks. Good night, everyone.